are sitting in this landscape. And so the valley undoubtedly did actually shape the narrative. There were things that happened while I was walking here on my own. I thought, okay, that has to come into the valley. And in many ways, the journey that Albrecht goes on, which I think is one where the natural landscape here essentially unlocks him and reminds him of the man he was before he became a soldier. A lot of his experiences in the valley were things that I experienced, and in a less dramatic fashion. I was living in London at the time. They are certainly echoes of a similar unlocking that I felt in myself actually when I was here. When we pause later, we'll be able to see a very specific ruin called Upper Blind, which hasn't fallen quite into sort of as much disrepair as this ruin here. We won't be able to go into Upper Blind, but if you ever come back to the Olchon on your own, and I should say that you should, because the way to experience this valley, although this is wonderful, the way to experience this valley, I think, is actually on your own. It's a wonderful place to have that solitary experience, and to have that experience, especially on the valley floor, where because these valley walls are so steep, you find yourself constantly looking up. Something else very interesting, I'm sure that actually looking up, we were saying, leaves you slightly more open to things, I think. After all, they were their men, their husbands. No one could read them like they could. So no surprise if they should see what was coming. That's what the women said in the long silence afterwards. But in truth, none of them had seen any change in the men's behaviour. None of them had known the men were leaving, and in many ways this was the hardest part of what happened. Their husbands had left in the night. Just a few days after the news of the invasion had come crackling through on Maggie's wireless that was propped on a Bible on her kitchen table, the men, lit by the hunter's moon, had met at William's milking shed and slipped out of the valley. Moving in single file, they'd walked through the higher fields and up over the Hatchell Ridge, an ellipsis of 7 dark shapes, decreasing over the hill's shoulder, shortening to a last full stop, and then nothing, just the blank page of the empty slope. The women, meanwhile, slept soundly in their beds, and it was only in the morning, when a weak September sun shone into the valley, that they realised what had happened. For Sarah Lewis, it began in her sleep. The drag, rattle and bark of the dogs straining on their chains were so persistent it entered her dreams. A ship in storm, the sailors shouting for help from the deck, their pink faces and open mouths obscured by the spray that was blown up the sides of the hull. Then the noise had become Marley's ghost, dragging his shackles over a flagstone floor. Click, slump, click, slump. Eventually, as the light had brightened about the edges of the blackout curtain, and Sarah had surfaced through the layers of her sleep, the sound became what it was. The 2 dogs, urgent and distressed, pulling again and again on their rusty chains, and barking short and sharp through the constraint of their collars. Without opening her eyes, Sarah slid her hand across the sheet behind her, feeling for the warm impression of her husband's body. The old horsehair mattress they slept on could hold the shape of a man all day, and although Tom was usually up before her, she found some comfort in touching the warm indentation of where he'd lain beside her. She stroked her palm over the thin cotton sheet. A few hairs poking through the mattress caught against her skin, as hard and stubborn as the bristles on the sow's back. And there he was, a long valley where his weight had pressed the ball of his shoulder and his upper arm into the bed, a rise where his neck had lain under the pillow. She explored further down, a deeper bowl again, sunk by a protruding hip, and then the shallower depression of his legs tapering towards the foot of his bed. As usual, Tom's shape, the landscape of him was there, but it was cold. Normally, Sarah could still feel the last traces of his body's heat, held in the fabric of